You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Welcome to Living the Gospel of Life. I'm your host, Leticia Velasquez. Today I'm honored to interview George Denny, who is a lifelong Catholic with a background in education, political science, and history. He's worked in many different fields, and I saw a post that he had put about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and some of her legacy with regards to feminism. So let's start with a prayer, and then we'll get into our meeting, our discussion. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us
sinners.
Now
and in the hour of our death.
Amen.
Amen.
In the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Welcome, George. It's great to meet you. We met online a few days ago, and I was very impressed with your knowledge of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and some of her legal decisions regarding women. Everyone has been talking about her legacy recently, and you seem to have a good handle on it. How did you get so interested in politics and the law?
Well, hi, Leticia. It is great to be with you, and thank you very much for the invitation. Well, my interest in politics and law obviously traces to both of my parents. My father was a veteran of World War II and was caught up in the lead-in to the war, so obviously politics and the news became something of a great interest to him afterwards because there was a great distrust of the government after Franklin Roosevelt said that no mother's son would fight in a firearm war, and then, of course, they did. On Mom's side of the family, my mom actually had been the executive secretary to the president of the Prudential Insurance Company in New York City. Mom had her own secretary, left when she met my dad, and then I came along. Unfortunately, a few years later, my mom got hurt and had to go back to work and then started a second career for 27 years as a legal secretary to the gentleman who was actually the chairman of the board of the Butler Aviation Company in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So that, as well as a couple of relatives who were in the law, has kind of led me in that direction.
I myself am the daughter of a judge, so I know how you feel. From childhood, if I wanted 15 extra minutes out of bed, I had to present 3 pieces of evidence. So I learned how to present my case factually, and with good basis and provable evidence for sure. It's good. It's good training for the mind. And I find I'm a teacher of English as a second language, and I find so many kids are not learning any logic, any approach to rhetoric and building an argument, just my feelings. And I do believe this is deliberate. I believe that we're being manipulated by having our ability to form a logical argument, fast fact-based argument, has been taken away, I would say, from the 70s when I was in public school. And I was taught that the Catholic Church was the basis for all evil in the world. I learned to build an argument very quickly in 8th grade. It was actually a very good benefit for my education. A little tough on my social life. Can you imagine how popular that may be? But I learned it was very interesting that Mao Zedong at the time was conducting the Great Step Forward, where he killed, I think, 30 to 60 million of his own people through starvation and other means. And my teacher had his picture on the wall and his sayings, as if he were some kind of figure to be admired, and we had to walk around with our little red books. Imagine if that had been the Stations of the Cross. and
how much better the world would be with that, wouldn't it?
Right? Yeah, but there would be a backlash like the world has never seen. So yeah, I learned to do some research. This is pre-internet, folks, way pre-internet, on communism, and argued with my teacher day in and day out. She was good enough to give me an A. She was at least gracious that way. But it didn't matter because the education I got was, in spite of her attempts to propagandize, and I don't think anybody else in the classroom was as swayed by her arguments as they would have been. And We just have to keep doing our best now that we have social media of presenting the truth and hoping that people out there are still using their minds critically to look at the truth and perhaps have their minds changed. So you presented a piece of evidence regarding Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Would you like to tell my audience what it was?
Absolutely. In 1977, the book was published, and it was published with Ruth Bader Ginsburg and a woman whose first name escapes me at the moment, but her last name was Feigen Fastow. And it was actually done under a United States government contract that was let out during the Carter administration. And essentially what this book is looking to do is remove any and all social, cultural distinctions between the genders, between races, between everyone.
And you said this came out in what year, George?
1977, underneath the Carter administration.
Yeah.
It was published under the auspices, I believe, of the Department of Health and Human Services at the time.
Wow. Now, was this in support of the Equal Rights Amendment? I remember that was being pushed.
Well, absolutely. You and I are fairly common in our time frame because, yes, the Equal Rights Amendment was going on in the early to mid-'70s. And as you know, that's when NOW had exploded onto the scene. And that was the big push that they were making was the Equal Rights Amendment.
Right.
When that was starting to fall apart, that's when they actually began something that we're still dealing with today, which is they decided to work within the government, kind of get in and work within and subvert, if you will, what was the culture of the time. They wanted
so
to
isn't that
change it
interesting?
wholesale.
Democrats always find a way around when they can't win through the altering of the Constitution and a constitutional amendment. The ERA lost. I forget which year, but it was in the 70s. Then they look to find another way around.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
very often it's been the Supreme Court where they find their way around legislation. They legislate from the bench, or at least their justices do.
Oh, of course, as we see even today with Judge Amy Coney Barrett being elevated to nomination for the Supreme Court to take Justice Ginsburg's place. The first thing they talk about doing is packing the court. Now, I can reference again Franklin Roosevelt in the 30s in trying to push through the New Deal and receiving a rebuke from Congress that they were concerned about the expenditures. They were concerned about the overarching reach of the government programs going into areas of people's lives that it had never done before. And what did Roosevelt's first reaction to do? He wanted to pack the court.
Because that was exactly his intent, is to get involved deeply into Americans' lives, even to their bedrooms.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Of course. And that's one of the reasons why Franklin Roosevelt was a big hero to the Soviet Union. It wasn't just the aid that he provided to them during the war. There were many people even in his administration that admired some of the things that were going on in the Soviet Union at the time. And as you mentioned about Mao, well, Mao and Stalin are two of the biggest murderers in the 20th century, along with Adolf Hitler. So
they put Hitler to shame, I believe. I believe they killed many more people than he did, but it's only fashionable to talk about Hitler's murdering.
Well, of their own people, absolutely. Overall, World War II killed approximately 75 million people.
Mm-hmm.
So
you can pin that on Hitler, but the communists have killed 100 million people in total.
Oh, easily. I mean, you
and
can talk about...
And that's based on faulty reporting because they certainly didn't tell us the truth.
Oh, and they're not going to admit anything that they've ever done. No.
Right.
No.
Right. One of the most important facets of communism is to control the media, and so therefore you will never know the truth.
Well, it was so ironic that they actually named their primary party newspaper Pravda, Truth, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's sort of like George Orwell, truth is fiction.
Well, I think you and I as Catholics understand that we got truth argument a little over 2,000 years, and our Lord actually had it with Pilate. So,
yes, he claimed that he was the truth. and he is the truth. But yeah, so that's why the communists have been trying to steal that right ever since. Who is truthful? Who is the truth? Whose truth do we believe? That's the latest tactic.
Well,
your truth and my truth and
of course,
everybody's truth.
One of the axioms to that is he who controls the language controls the debate.
Exactly.
And
so there we go.
We
today. Have people who are arguing, especially women, about the term feminism right now. Who is a feminist? Do you have to be pro-abortion to be a feminist? Is a feminist just someone who wants equal pay and for equal work and for women to be given the same opportunities as men? Or is a feminist somebody who's one of those radical feminists like Ruth Bader Ginsburg who sees abortion as reproductive justice? And that's the argument over language that women and we are having with Judge Amy Coney Barrett in her nomination.
Absolutely. Well, let's touch back a moment very quickly on your intro when you were talking about education. That is exactly why education has been transformed the manner that it has from the 70s to today. You speak of working as an ESL teacher, and I applaud you very much for doing that, helping people to acclimate to our society and become better citizens and have better lives in our country that they've migrated to. But one of the other things that's very important with language and education is, and I can speak to this because I worked as a substitute teacher in New Jersey only within the last 20 years. I actually had a teacher telling students that communism was the ideal system.
Wow. In what class was that? Fiction?
This was actually, believe it or not, in a 7th, 8th grade social studies class.
Yeah, it's usually the social studies, at least originally, as I found in the 70s, it was the social studies classes. Remember, there used to be history classes or geography classes?
Yep.
Well, they became social studies because then you could sort of inject opinion a little bit more easily. But now, I was also a literature major. I found my literature class was teaching communism. Under not critical race theory, it was... what do they call it? Deconstructive literature. So literature doesn't mean anything. We just have literature for the sound of the language. All that, literary criticism we had for centuries is a bunch of nonsense. It's sort of the same thing they're doing to the scriptures. The communists, and we were studying Georg Lukács, who was a Hungarian communist, they tell us how to read books, how to interpret history, how to interpret politics. And it's funny that teacher came right out and said it so blatantly. She must have done a lot of work before that to prepare the ground to be able to lay that one on people. We're
teaching in a local elementary school. It was a small town here in Sussex County, New Jersey, where I live. And it was kind of like everybody's little hometown where you knew everybody. You were kind of... You let your guard down because the last thing you would expect is somebody who's going to come in and tell you that communism is the best system, particularly in about the year 2005 or 2006.
So what was the reaction, George, of the people?
Well, one of the students actually came up and approached me and informed me of it because he was very upset by it.
Good for her.
So, it was a young man, and it definitely was. And before I went to the administration, I pulled the teacher aside when I saw her in the hallway. And in as controlled of a manner as possible, I did try and ask her, "Are you crazy?"
I'd love to have seen that conversation.
Well, and of course her eyes, she got the shocked look. And then I said to her, I said, "Why are you telling me?" She goes, "Well, in an ideal world." I said, "There is no ideal world. There never will be an ideal world." And just as you pointed out, Mao and Stalin, let alone what Lenin did, they have killed 100 million people easily between the former Soviet Union and Communist China, let alone the others that have suffered because of their ideology throughout the world. And it's not even the people waiting on bread lines in the Soviet Union or the Chinese, scraping rice or begging on the streets or in fear of being run over by tanks. It literally is mind control.
Yeah.
As you're getting to and as you're pointing out very well, it is absolute mind control. And when you control the mind, you control the person. Absolutely. And one of the things that I was struck by was the lack of critical thinking skills that they were teaching the kids in the upper grades in elementary school as they were preparing to go to high school and then ultimately on to college. And I would try and inject as best as I could not to accept things at face value, to research things. Don't rely on Wikipedia. Rely on trusted sources.
Right.
Wikipedia could be anybody that Wikipedia designates as an editor for whatever reason. But
I've edited for Wikipedia, and I do think the subject I edited I was reliable, but there was no one there to check me except the next person who came along. So it's extremely subjective.
Absolutely.
You could call it a public consensus, but you're not sure that the public is not being censored. What they can and cannot say. It is really hard to pick a source nowadays. But once you know trusted news outlets that are reliable, you can count on them. I get most of my news from my Twitter feed, but I'm very I always check the source.
Yes, you have to. And fortunately, I make good use of my Apple News feed, and I probably have about 16 to 18 different news sources that I look through the course of the day. Even going back to when I was younger and in high school in the 70s, I would read 4 newspapers a day because I figured that between the 4 of them, I would finally get some kernel of truth that then
it's sort of like reading
on.
questions on a multiple choice exam. If you don't know the question, you don't understand it, you can look at the 4 answers and figure out what it is. Same thing with looking at the 4 newspapers. Somehow there's a commonality in there that's the truth, and they all have a little slant on it. But sooner or later you could suss it out. And that's true. You never, ever let your guard down. So this back to this book with Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the other woman that came out in the 70s around the time of the Equal Rights Amendment, which, by the way, what did the Equal Rights Amendment propose? That women be treated exactly as men. Because in the view of the proponents of that amendment, there is no such thing as being different and of equal dignity, as Pope John Paul has often said in many of his encyclicals, about the feminine genius and the gifts that women bring. No, women have to be exactly like men, including military service, combat. I have nothing against military service for women, but I mean forced combat. We are definitely not the physical equivalent of men. We're different, and I would say that any woman who's given birth is a soldier in a certain sense, but giving birth is not a skill that happens on the battlefield. So it's not necessarily something that I would ever have supported. In fact, I was scared of it in the 70s because I could have been drafted.
Yes.
If the draft had continued, the war had continued in Vietnam. So, all right. So, what were the points that Ginsburg was
some
making?
of the things that were contained in this are exactly what we're experiencing today, and particularly since 2015 with the Obergefell Supreme Court decision where Justice Kennedy was the swing vote, which enabled, quote unquote, gay marriage. Within this book, it lists how they're going to do completely away with any reference to man or woman. You're going to straight gender neutral language.
And that was back in the 70s. Wow, so they really haven't changed their agenda much in almost 50 years.
No, well, let's not forget, one thing that has to come in, particularly when it regards Ruth Bader Ginsburg's legacy, is some of those militant feminists that were behind the NOW movement and the Equal Rights Amendment were the same ones who are still today, or have actually passed the torch on, so to speak, to others, where they actually feel that a woman having children or being pregnant is a burden or is contrary to what they should have, that it's an oppressive experience to go through because men are in control and men are fortunate. So we need to remember that there's this mindset that's buried in a certain segment of this grouping that really is beyond radical, even beyond what Ruth Bader Ginsburg herself proposed. But back to that, not only gender-neutral language, women serving in all fashions throughout the military. It also spoke about creating a more level field, if you will, because I don't think they foresaw at the time that there was a possibility to have gay marriage. But it's also discussed in there how to create more of an environment that would be welcoming, if you will, for people like that. And one of the things that really struck me in this book and in the piece that I posted on Facebook was, and it goes to me something that speaks to being a woman, a mother, a fellow human being, is that they actually proposed repealing the Mann Act in this book. The Mann Act, the Mann Act goes back to the 1930s, just around the time when the Roosevelt administration was coming in. I think it was enacted between 1932 and 1934, if my memory serves me correctly. And what the Mann Act did essentially was, if you can kind of think back then, there were not a lot of interstate highways or roads.
Right.
There weren't even a lot of roads in states. Okay, you had old US 1, maybe 46. There were no 80s, no major highways. Very difficult to get from state to state.
Right.
And most of the time it was done by rail. But what they found was when they started building roads and automobile traffic increased, kids were being kidnapped and taken across state lines.
Wow.
And they were being sold, and they were being used for prostitution.
As they are now, in terrible numbers.
Unfortunately, human nature has not developed the way it ought to have.
So highways enable this, you're saying?
Highways enable the interstate trafficking of underage children, and specifically underage girls, for the means of prostitution. Now, what Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Ms. Feigen Fastow suggest in this book is to completely repeal the Mann Act, which would enable the trafficking of adolescents down to the age of at least 15 across state lines for the means of prostitution. Because one of the other little nuggets in there is, again, is they think that pregnancy is oppressive and women should control their bodies and everything, they also want to make prostitution legal.
So they were legalizing prostitution of what we now consider underage young women. Unbelievable.
And also women of the age of maturity, over the age of 18. But also, yes, primarily, they wanted to go down to the age of 15. And as we can see, as you mentioned, all the kids that are being rescued right now, that the Trump administration has this program going on, they're pulling 20 kids out of one city, 50 kids out of another.
It's mind-boggling. It's how many are there. I mean, you know, how pervasive it is.
It's chilling. But what Mrs. Ginsburg wanted to do, for someone who supposedly was a champion of women, she essentially wanted women to enable themselves to become prostitutes and allow adolescent girls
to become prostitutes. Now, let me ask you something. In 1930, well, she wrote this in the 70s, but abortion, Roe versus Wade, had already been passed by the Supreme Court. Abortion was legal before then on a state-by-state basis, but it made all states accept it throughout all 9 months of birth until we did Planned Parenthood versus Casey in 92, which allowed state restrictions. Nobody knows that. Very few Americans know that. But many prostitutes are forced to undergo abortions.
Multiple abortions, yes.
Yeah, multiple abortions. That's so abortion and prostitution really go hand in hand. And we had a case in Connecticut where an underage girl was kidnapped for a couple of years, and she went into Planned Parenthood for an abortion, underaged, and they did not report it. She was rescued a few months later, but she could have been saved months earlier if Planned Parenthood had done due diligence, and they had broken the law, and of course were never prosecuted for it. I tried to put a pregnancy center next to that Planned Parenthood, and it was swiftly turned down. But anyway, Yeah, so they regularly see underage trafficked women come in with their pimps and do not, obviously an age gap, and do not report it. Because why?
No.
Because they want the business of the abortion.
Well, not only because they want the business, but because also now at this point that we've moved on from 1977 to where we find ourselves in 2020 and the sociocultural chaos that we're dealing with, their world, unfortunately, is beginning to come to pass. And it is really starting to take root, particularly in this younger generation, I'd say of 30 and under, who have really been indoctrinated because they're not allowed to critically think. They're not allowed to question. They're not taught anything different. And so they're the ones that are kind of picking up the torch, but almost like drones. I don't think they even know what they're spouting sometimes and what they're talking about. It seems like they're just regurgitating something they've memorized.
Well, they've never been made aware of their own human dignity in the eyes of God. Unfortunately, the parents trust the schools too much, or maybe they agree with it. And they don't take them to church where they're going to hear a different point of view. Or if they do, the kids, my mother was a CCD teacher and did a very good job in third grade, but she said, I'm teaching the kids that God created them 1 hour a week. And they have how many hours a week in school where they're hearing you evolved from apes? And what chance do I have that they're going to believe in God? And, you're up against it, or the consumption of media by these kids alone, never mind schools. And the way the media is shutting out the Christian worldview is really stunning. So from all different perspectives, a child that doesn't believe that is an absolute miracle. Because they're a really free thinker and they've had some other influences in their lives. Mostly, they have to be conscious. You can't happen onto this point of view by yourself.
No, you can't. And you also just hit something that I think is gone hand in glove with this agenda that they've been putting forward, and that is, the kids and what they're exposed to, and the lack of religion, the lack of teaching them that they are a person of dignity. But what also works on that and chips away at that constantly, particularly over the last 20 years is, and you hit this right on the head, media.
Yeah.
And I think if you look back, as you and I can, with the perspective that we have, we can look back to the 70s and we can see the trajectory of the media. We can see the trajectory of what went on in the entertainment industry.
Yep.
Okay? Where when cable first came out in our area, ballpark about the mid to late 70s, if you saw an exposed breast, it was, my God, it was like a shock that you couldn't even express what you saw, and it just nervous laughter more than anything else. And look where we are today.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not even on the passive receptive devices, as I like to call televisions, that are in the home. It's on the phone.
And any kid can find it. And the numbers of young children exposed to pornography is absolutely, it's ridiculous. It's horrible.
It's been going on for 15 years at least.
I'm even old enough to remember if you had a computer, you kept it in the family room so that you could watch what your kids were seeing. Boy, those days are long gone. And that's when I home educated my own 3 girls. And when, that's what we would do. We would keep the computer in a common area. Boy, those days are gone. I managed to raise 3 young women who are well-educated and kept the faith. But it's because, at least for a good portion of their education, they had this from home. They were home-educated, and they heard the truth of the Catholic Church. And they were also, exposed to media, but with supervision. Look at this. This is exploiting women. Look at this. This is showing women as objects and men as objects. This is violating God's commandments. This is not up to a woman's dignity. So, thank heavens my girls are in the medical field, and they're very well versed on this. But boy, it's a filthy world that they're in right now, and my sympathy is with them, because I found the school environment was very hostile. To me,
easily.
because they picked up that I was pro-life, and I kept getting my contracts non-renewed as a teacher. I never managed to get tenure because they'd pick up on what I believed in, even though I thought I was keeping it a secret. I'll tell you, twice I was asked to translate into Spanish. I speak Spanish for Planned Parenthood, and both times I was pregnant and counting on the school for benefits.
Oh, my.
And I just got on my knees both times and said, "Okay, Lord." I'll defy them if you want, but I'd really rather stay here. And both times, two different districts, the Planned Parenthood representatives suddenly forgot to show up and never reschedule that year. I consider that my miracle. But boy, see, everybody that's in this culture is going to be forced to make that kind of an accounting sooner or later. Lord, I'm going to have to lose this job. And I think it's going to become more and more common, particularly if the Democrats win, because this sort of thing is going to be forced on us even more than it already is. I mean, look at the Little Sisters of the Poor. They're already up for it again. If Biden has promised, if he gets in, that the Little Sisters will face court again. How many times have they been in the Supreme Court? Twice?
You mean the Catholic presidential candidate?
Yeah, the Catholic in quotes. Well, actually, I read a good article in Crisis Magazine which said the trouble isn't that there's a candidate like Joe Biden. The trouble is there's 10 million of them running around. He's not unusual.
I saw that.
And if you go to a Catholic institution of higher learning, most of the time that's what they will create. Somebody who believes that the social gospel outweighs the morality of the church, the non-negotiable life and death 10 commandments. Mother Teresa managed to help millions around the world without violating the morality of the Catholic Church. But somehow these people are convinced that you have to allow abortion if you're compassionate for the poor, et cetera, et cetera. That's how 80% of the abortion mills ended up in the poor neighborhoods. It's amazing. Such compassion.
It's not even. It's just the question, too. Let's not forget that Miss Sanger thought that they were animals breeding relentlessly. So she thought that they had absolutely no ability for self-control or anything, and that was her racist view.
And people like Mrs. Ginsburg, too, because Sanger was an anti-Semite. Yes. So she was anti-anyone but herself. She had been an Irish Catholic. And just wanted to eliminate people like my daughter with Down syndrome, my Italian ancestors, my Polish ancestors, Hispanics, blacks, Asians, anybody but herself, who she considered, of course, superior.
Yeah, absolutely.
And most people are for abortion, and eugenic abortion particularly, which is what abortion is, are only for people, they consider themselves the only person who should reproduce. And even then they want to keep abortion handy just in case.
It really does come down to they really do pick away at everything around you, and they get down to the real ego and id negatives where they go for your self-interest. And that's where the sexuality comes in as well, because essentially what they're looking to do is they're reducing us down to bonobos. Bonobo chimpanzees, perhaps, where we're going to respond for food, we're going to respond for a command, we're going to respond for this, but that's it. We're not going to be independent. We won't think. We won't do for ourselves. And, it's interesting. It's interesting you brought up higher education and higher learning. I'll qualify it this way. I'm a veteran of Seton Hall University when Archbishop McCarrick was in charge of the diocese.
There's a whole show.
Okay, and let me also say that my family goes back in the North Archdiocese easily to 1910, and I myself only left the diocese in 2000. So there's a long history on both sides of my family in that diocese, and particularly with Seton Hall University, because my Nana came here from Ireland, met my grandfather, my father's parents, gave birth to my dad, and they were within walking distance of Seton Hall. And my Nana used to make my father walk up and muck the stable for the bishop, who used to have the horse-drawn carriage still up there in the barn, as they call it, at Seton Hall, which the last time I was there is now the School of Arts. But that was,
I think that's a little ironic with some of the art they're promoting.
It could be. But you can understand that while I was at Seton Hall University under Archbishop McCarrick as Archbishop of the North Diocese, I had to take religion classes. And I took a religion class, and I am a cradle Catholic. To the best knowledge that I have, both sides of my family are Catholic for at least 1,000 years. Mm-hmm. That being said, I was an altar boy. I served under Father Paul Wickens at St. Venantius in Orange. Father Wickens got in trouble with Archbishop Garrity in the 70s because he did not want to stop saying the traditional Latin Mass, or as they referred to it at the time as the Tridentine Mass.
Right.
I actually learned the foot prayers of the altar and the Mass in Latin as an altar boy. So then I went to Seton Hall, made it through most of my poli-sci and my history courses, and had to take 2 religion courses as per the requirement. Took the first one, no problem. Took the second one, problem. The father that taught the course was driving a red 5.0 Mustang convertible and stated right out in class that he really couldn't wait for St. Pope John Paul II to pass, because that's when he knew they were going to allow priests to marry.
Wow.
And needless to say, I had quite a bit of difficulty in that class, but I did manage to squeak out with a B-, because I think that if it had gotten any lower and he and I went before the head of the department, I think he realized he probably would have been forced to change the grade, so he didn't want to go too low.
Okay. Well, good for you for giving him a hard time. What kind of stuff was he teaching?
Well, he was essentially teaching that love is love.
Oh.
We need to be accepting, and not the love is love that it is today, but we need to be accepting in a more.
Yeah, well, that's where it started. Remember, all they wanted was tolerance and not to be beat up. And who could argue with that, right? That's unreasonable.
Not at all. Well, that's what they do. That's what Black Lives Matter does. That's what Antifa tries to do, and if they can't, they go right to the top in the scale and go right to violence. But that's exactly what they try and do. They try and pin you and put you into a position that doesn't allow you any room to counter them or to get out of the argument. And
you're
again, that goes back, that goes back to what we were saying about control the language, control the debate. And that's what they're doing, and that's what Justice Ginsburg and this woman, Ms. Feigen-Fastow, wanted to do with this book. This is exactly what they are proposing in this book. They wanted to wholesale change all the language relating to men, women, gender, and any of their places within society and culture at that time to bring about radical change. Not just change, radical change. So, and the language is very important.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And that's why I appreciate your saying gay marriage in quotes, because marriage is between a man and a woman. That's how God designed it. And no state can change that. Because, first of all, states don't marry you in the church, and as Catholic, we believe that that's the only true marriage. You have civil arrangements called marriage, but it's not the same. They cannot make me change that. But then again, I'm not employed at this time, so I don't have some employer threatening me.
And luckily, fortunately, I am the same way, too, because I am disabled, and I don't have to deal with the chaos that's out there right now. But I can also speak to another aspect of this. I just unfortunately walked out of a relationship 6 months ago. It was dying a slow death over the last 2 years, where I was trying to work with my fiancée to get her to a place where she needed to be. But what was working underneath and slowly chipping away with this was her son was gay.
Oh.
And I knew this from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat down with him and I spoke to him as a Catholic. And I said to him, John, I don't understand it. It literally makes no sense to me. But I will tell you this. As a Catholic, it does not give me the privilege to judge you or to do anything negative to you. I am to treat you with the same dignity and respect that I treat every person on this planet, and I am to look at you as if you are Jesus himself. That's where I come from. I say, don't understand it, I don't get it. His mom claimed that she was Catholic as well. Things were great for 4 or 5 years. The Obergefell decision comes through that legalized, quote-unquote, gay marriage. Boy, did things start going downhill fast. And to the point where the last year was painful. And going to family events, I had I helped take care of her mother as her mother passed. This is how close and how deep we were in the family. Her uncle looked at me, who happened to be gay as well, and he looked at me and just walked right out the room. He wouldn't talk to me again and never talked to me again.
I'm so sorry.
Most of the
I can't imagine that your pain was multiplied by millions around the country.
Oh,
this is part of what's torn this country apart, and it's not our lack of love. It's our concern for truth.
Absolutely, and there is an objective truth. This is the one thing that too many people fail to understand. There is an objective truth. There is natural law. I don't care. As a Catholic, of course I care. As an individual, it's not my place to tell anybody what to do with themselves or their lives or invade their privacy. I am not going to knock on somebody's door and inquire as to what they're doing and force them to behave a particular way. But that being said, once you come out into the public square, then you have to take into account everybody else that's in that public square. And you do not have the right to impose whatever your opinion or your beliefs are on anybody else in that square. But that is what is exactly.
Isn't that funny? That was used against Catholics with politicians who were pro-life, right?
Yes.
I'm sorry, they were personally pro-life, like Mario Cuomo, the ex-governor of New York. Right? He came up with that canard. I'm personally pro-life. I don't want to impose my beliefs on anyone. Notice that they don't say that anymore because they're all about imposing their beliefs on us.
Oh, of course they are. Absolutely.
Because their beliefs are right, you see. In their view. And that's all that matters, is what they feel. It doesn't matter what's objectively right. It doesn't matter what mankind has said for thousands of years or our Lord wrote in the Ten Commandments. It doesn't matter. All that matters is what that person in power says is right. And that's why there was almost a cult around Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I mean, they had icons of her. They had movies and songs and exercise moves, and it was just crazy. They were creating a goddess of her. They called her a goddess because they don't know God.
That's what they do. You have to substitute something. I believe it was it Archbishop Sheen? And please correct me if I'm wrong, that if you don't fill your life with God, you'll fill it with everything else.
It does sound something like something he said, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that is exactly what they're giving and they're promoting, though. It's not just passive, as I talk about the passive receiver display, the television in everybody's home. This is actually being put out there as this is how things are. Not that this is where things are going, or would you like to discuss this? This is how things are. And if you don't accept it,
you should be shunned. Rod Dreher has a new book, which I'd really like to read. I'm going to look it up for a minute. The name just escaped me, but it's just coming out, and it's about social credits. Are you familiar with social credits? The Chinese have a system of social credits. Any communist country does, where if you're a good citizen, you get privileges. Like in Russia, do you join the party, then you get a certain job, you get a certain college. So social credits are things you earn by being a good communist. Yep. So we are already starting to implement them. We have for some time in America. We've
done obviously in the industries where, of course, they got in and they populated, and you yourself, from what you related to us a few minutes ago, you experienced it by not getting tenure.
Oh, yeah. I wasn't going to get social credits. And they gave me silly reasons like we don't like your wardrobe or you had too many absences. I never had more absences than I was allowed, and I was a new mother, and let's just say my figure was different than it was before motherhood. So I had a dress suit every day. Maybe not as many as they would have liked. I was in a poor area. I didn't think being flashy was a good idea. And have more clothes than my students did. But I always looked good and professional. Yeah, so crazy things like that were said to me. My St. Patrick's Day lesson was criticized because it was a white-based lesson. See, I didn't know about critical race theory yet. I was ignorant. That it's oppressive to teach about why the local town was painting a line of green down the street and bagpipe parades were going on, people drinking green beer and putting up shamrocks everywhere. I thought my Dominican students might want to know of this little cultural thing called St. Patrick's Day. So I had a 5-cent lesson, music and food and handicrafts, teaching them about Irish culture. Instead, I was told you should have taught them about Dominican Day. I said, it's my impression they kind of know about it, right? They could teach me about Dominican Day, and that would be great. In fact, I learned a lot of Latin American culture. But St. Patrick's Day is something that I tried to teach. And because I was teaching a white holiday, I was, given a bad rating for my lesson. That was one of the ways they took away my social credit because I dared to teach something white.
Well,
in a Latino, primarily, Latino school. Well, which, by the way, if I were a bigot, would I have been teaching there? I always taught in minority schools because I was bilingual. By the way, the book by Rod Dreher is called Live Not by Lies. It's based on a speech by Alexander Solzhenitsyn.
Yes, I just saw him interviewed on Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, a manual for Christian dissidents. I love Tucker's face when he's interviewing somebody. You can always tell what's on his mind. And Rod Dreher had this line, Christians or Americans don't know how to suffer anymore. And Tucker just looked totally flummoxed by it. Yeah. And it's a really, I believe Tucker's a Christian, but he's not a hardcore Christian as much as Dreher is, or some of us, who understand that when you're soft, that it's very easy to manipulate you.
I think a lot of people, whether they be Christian, Jewish, whatever their faith is, whatever their political leanings were, as we saw in the election in 2016 with President Trump getting elected, I think a lot of people are starting finally to realize what's been going on and are finally starting to fight back a little bit. I don't think we're too far gone yet, but, it is very, very important that we need to get children educated, not indoctrinated. We need to get children critical thinking skills. We need to put them in an environment where they know that they're valued, that they have dignity, that they have a purpose in this life, that it is not about them, that it is not about consumerism, that, as I believe, we're here for everybody else. We're not here for ourselves.
Yes.
And I'm taught that through my Catholic faith. So we need to start with the kids because that's what the communists did. Mm-hmm. And the
Catholic Church used to understand giving a child till they're 7 and they'll be ours for life. The communists did too, and so did Hitler. One of the first things he did was outlaw homeschooling because he needed to get to the kids. And Maria von Trapp, in her book, The Story of the Trapp-Family Singers, explains how their children were being indoctrinated in school and taught to report on their parents, very much like the communists. And very much like me in 5th grade, my 5th grade teacher had me give my father a prejudice test, and he failed. And I reported it to my teacher, and I got in big arguments. This is when I was making up my mind whether my parents were, foolish or not, or my teachers were right. And, I was brought up in a very Catholic home, but still, those public school teachers have a lot of sway. They have you for 30-plus hours a week.
Yes.
I can still remember those. We had an argument over whether Jews belong to a race. Or was it a religion? And, if you look at the Bible, it's clearly a race and a religion. But, I had to report my dad, for being a bigot. And so much so they sent me in for a psychological evaluation, and the psychiatrist said, your problem is your dad's a male chauvinist pig. That was my mental problem. With I was bullied for being a little conservative nerd, and... It was my dad's fault. I get a laugh at that even now. He was Archie Bunker back in the day when Archie was a big TV
in many
personality.
Respects, I still can be reflexively. My dad was born in 1919. My mom was born in 1922. My grandfather, my father's father, was born in 1879. Wow. My great-grandfather was born in 1839.
Wow.
So literally from myself to my great-grandfather, I go back 181 years. And I have, fortunately, more values that are grounded in the 19th and early 20th century than I do in the mid-20th century and on, because it was difficult for us in the 70s. You had a lot of polls. You had a lot of draw. There were a lot of things that were being promoted. There were concerts. There were activities. There were a lot of things to pull you out of your circle and bring you out to where they wanted you, because then they could work on you. Then they could chip away slowly.
And my parents said no to all of it, so God bless them. And I fought them sometimes. I wasn't seeing anything above PG, and I certainly wasn't going to any concerts. And I was spared that whole 70s, nonsense. But, it still worked its way into me anyway, somewhat. I managed to fight it back again in my 20s. But many people lose that battle, and then they've given over to a life of sin, and they don't believe in confession because it was downplayed in the 70s. And
of course,
they don't have a way out. They don't know how to get out, and they're trapped. And then they rationalize it, and they teach their children to rationalize it. And then you have a couple more generations. I run a pregnancy center, and when I see a young woman and I ask her religious background, I get a shrug and a thoughtful look. I think my grandmother went to church. That's how far divorced they are from any faith background at all. And no wonder they're adrift and their lives are a mess.
Well, we see, unfortunately, what's happened to what used to be referred to as the mainline Protestant denominations in the country. Yeah. They have wholesale, lock, stock, and barrel, just went right down that rabbit hole. And unfortunately, there's some within our own hierarchy that seem to feel that we need to go in that direction as well.
Oh, yeah, it's amazing looking at the disaster of the mainline Protestants and Reformed Jews. And the churches and synagogues are empty, they're falling apart, and they've given into every cultural innovation, gay clergy, women clergy, all kinds of craziness, abortion, gay marriage, and yet the Catholic Church, especially the German Catholic Church, is trying to rush headlong behind them, thinking that somehow they're going to have a different outcome. Definition of insanity, right? Or depravity, one or the other. But anyway, George, I could talk to you forever. This has been a wonderful session. Basically, I'd love to have you back to talk more about culture. You seem to have a great grasp of history and culture and the recent problems in the Catholic Church. Definitely want to remind our readers, our listeners, that Ruth Bader Ginsburg has a different legacy than you may have been told. Look into it yourself. Where did you find out about this book, and what do you recommend people read about her?
I absolutely recommend that people look up this book, and forgive me that the title escapes me right now, but I know that Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Ms. Feigen Fastow, her last name is spelled Feigen Fasteau, and it is published in 1977. And I would absolutely suggest first that they read this book and get an eye-opening experience as to what the foundation of Justice Ginsburg's philosophy and the rest of her legal opinions were going to be. Then I would really suggest, let's start with the Catholic Church. Mm. And look at the things that St. Pope John Paul II has said about life and human sexuality. Okay? The Catholic Church is not all about, hey, you can't do that. It's that you can do that when you're blessed by God in a sanctified marriage. Because that's what we're here for, to bring life into the world in that manner. We're not here to be bonobos. But I would definitely suggest to start with that book and then go into the Catholic Church and also look at the wonderful material that Father Stephen Imparato puts out there, that Father Frank Pavone puts out there. Anyone affiliated with Priests for Life, or even yourself, that you opened up, I believe, a help center for pregnant moms.
Mm-hmm. Pathways Pregnancy in Norwich, Connecticut. I've written 2 books, one of which is a pro-life book. A Special Mother is Born. And I'm going to write an article for National Right to Life News about Amy Coney Barrett, another mother of a child with Down syndrome. And I think that's why she offends these people so much, because she is a joyful mother of 7 and an incredibly intelligent and accomplished woman. and seems very in a very healthy, happy marriage. She has it all. She belies the lie that you have to kill, like some of these poor Hollywood stars have said, "Oh, if I wouldn't be where I am unless I killed my child in abortion." And her very life is a refutation of that. And that's why I think she really strikes a nerve, and they're pulling out all the stops, literally, to try and block this nomination. But they're trying to do it without sounding anti-Catholic, which is tricky because they have a Catholic, so-called Catholic VP nominee. So the next few weeks should be very interesting, George. Stay tuned, and we'll have you back on to provide further commentary if you're up for it.
I would love to come back anytime you would have me, Leticia. It was a wonderful experience today. Thank you so much for the invitation, and I wish the best to you.
So tell us your Twitter handle so people can find you.
I don't have a Twitter handle. I'm only on Facebook.
Oh, Facebook. That's right. I'm sorry. Yes, George Denny, okay. D-E-N-Y. That's right. Yep. You're a Facebook friend.
I'm on Facebook. I did sign up for Parler, but I haven't really gotten too active yet. I was on Twitter, but I knew I would have been thrown off, and I did just get out of Facebook jail.
Okay, it's George A. Denny, D-E-N-N-Y, on Facebook. If you want to find my new friend George. And let's give him some follows, and hopefully we'll get
Irish Rover as well.
Oh, Irish Rover, is that your? Do you have a handle somewhere? Oh, on Parler.
That's right on Facebook. You can either look me up under George A. Denny or under Irish Rover. Either one will probably lead you to.
Is that your favorite song? Are you a Clancy Brothers fan?
I am, and I am three-quarters Irish. I'm a former Ancient Order of Hibernians Division president, proudly, and I am a proud Irish Catholic.
And there's a lot to love about that. I have an Irish grandmother myself who I was very close to. So, unfortunately, I never got to Ireland with her, but heard plenty of stories about the old country. And you know what she did? She loved the United States of America. She loved American history. And read it exclusively. Big fan of Abraham Lincoln, had a bust of him. So in addition to loving her faith and her country, she loved America. And that's why I married myself a Salvadoran American who also loves his country and went to the inauguration of Donald J. Trump and is happy to go again. I didn't have the guts. I was afraid of violence, unfortunately. So anyway, we'll keep in touch. We'll have you back on. And thank you for joining us at Living the Gospel of Life. God bless you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.